But I would like to introduce our speaker, Kara Snow, for a little talk on boreal chickadees. So Kara is an avian ecologist for the Natural Resources Research Institute out of Duluth. She got her undergraduate degree in wildlife management from the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and recently received her master's degree from the University of Minnesota Duluth with research focused on boreal chickadee breeding ecology and diet. She's also a board member of the MOU, serving as the chair to the Paper Sessions Planning Committee. So if you are interested in all the things that we've been going on in speaker finding, this is the person who does that with her committee. So I will welcome her up.
All right. Hi. Thank you, Clinton. I just wanted to say first that I was not involved in the choosing of the Bird of Year award. But when I heard that they chose the boreal chickadee, I thought to myself, like, yeah, that's about right. That's the best bird, clearly. And what a great bird to choose to highlight this theme of how are birds doing in our state and how are we doing as acting as stewards for birds in our state. So if you are familiar with, who's familiar with the boreal chickadee? Okay, who's never heard of one before? Oh, okay, we all know. So it's probably on your top 5 birds of the state list, right? Okay, yeah, okay, got one. Well, if it's not yet, I sure bet that after you get a little bit acquainted with it and you learn about some of like the challenges that it's facing in the state, that you will also agree that it is really one of the most special birds that we have in our state. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the research that we have done on boreal chickadees in our lab. But I'm also going to talk about their general ecology, their conservation status in the state, how forest management in the state could be improved to benefit this species, and then answer any questions that you might have. So, boreal chickadees, they are a member of the Paridae family, which includes tits and chickadees. They are grouped in what is called the brown-capped clade. And an interesting trait associated with this clade is that they all lack a broadcast or like a territorial song. So we're all very familiar with the black-capped chickadee, right? And their song in the spring, they're like, hey, sweetie. That's like their territorial song, and boreal chickadees don't have that. So they do have a call, which is a little bit similar to the common black-capped chickadee, which I'm going to play here. Hopefully it works, maybe. Nope. Maybe if I put the volume up. Okay, picture this. It's a black-capped chickadee who's smoked several packs a day and is like 75 years old, and it's like very wheezy. So you can kind of, okay, there you go. Hangs out at like bowling alleys. So boreal chickadees, they live pretty much exclusively in the northern boreal coniferous forests. They are a forest interior and area sensitive species. So that means that they require like large tracts of habitat, and they prefer to live in the inner parts of the forest as opposed to the edges. And here in Minnesota, they're at the very southern edge of their range, and they are associated with mature, old-growth, black spruce tamarack peatlands. They're permanent residents, so they're not migrators, although they have been known to have these periods of eruptions where they will move outside of their normal range for reasons kind of unknown. Like other chickadees, they are generalist foragers, so they feed on various arthropods, seeds, and berries. Their feeding style is to glean arthropods from the mid to outer parts of the branch and the mid to upper canopy of a tree. In the places that I have studied them, they tend to primarily feed off of black spruce trees, although I have witnessed them getting food off of tamaracks and very rarely paper birch. They have also been observed to use spider webs or plant down to kind of like secure their food under bark and branches to come back to later. And as far as I know, no other chickadee species do that, but I've never witnessed that myself, but I think that that's just a really neat little trait about their feeding style. So boreal chickadees are secondary cavity nesters. So that means that they nest in cavities or holes in trees made by either woodpeckers or other natural causes. They're able to do a little bit of like housekeeping excavation themselves, but they aren't quite strong enough to make their own cavities. The female will make the nest in the cavity, which she makes out of soft moss or grass, and then she'll line it with down or fur. They lay between 4 to 8 eggs, and the female does all of the incubation. So it's been really neat to be able to observe nestling development in this species. Hold on. Here are just some neat pictures of their development. There's day 1, that's the day that they hatch. So they're pretty, like, boreal chickadees are, like other passerine species, they are altricial, right? So they're born, they're naked, blind, completely dependent on their parental care. And then I have a picture of them on day 6. They're still blind, they have their primary pins are starting to come in, contour feathers are beginning to emerge. On day 10 is when they start to look kind of cute. Most of their wing feathers have emerged, contour feathers are starting to fill in, and here's a picture of them on day 15 when we banned them. So they're pretty much a fully baked boreal chickadee at this point. Alert, awake, they're able to run, and they will be leaving the nest in a couple days. So they typically tend to leave the nest around like day 18. Here in Minnesota, they are listed as a species of greatest conservation need by the DNR, with declines attributed to habitat loss and fragmentation. Results from the long-term Minnesota National Forest Breeding Bird Monitoring Program, which is a study conducted by the Avian Ecology Lab on bird populations in the Superior and Chippewa National Forest, is showing declines in the number of boreal chickadees being detected on their yearly surveys. And also, this isn't shown here, but we are also specifically noticing fewer numbers on the surveys that are in the more southern parts of where we do our surveying, which is suggesting that they're kind of being pushed out of the southern part and maybe pushed more north. And so this is in line with regional trends. The North American Breeding Bird Survey has also found a negative trend in their region-wide survey results. This figure on the right here is from eBird data, which reiterates these observations of population declines. So climate change is one of the main obstacles that they're facing. This species is highly vulnerable to climate change. So as temperatures warm, those boreal coniferous forests that they live in are predicted to recede north and likely to be replaced with like grasslands, shrub, deciduous trees. So that means that the boreal chickadee's range is going to be pushed further north. And again, Minnesota is at the very southern edge of their range, so any of those effects of climate change on the boreal forest are likely to be experienced here first. And in addition to habitat loss due solely to climate change, these conditions in the boreal forest are exacerbated by anthropogenic factors like logging and peat mining. So black spruce, which is the boreal chickadee's tree of choice here in Minnesota, is a highly valuable commercial resource. And black spruce harvest in the state has been generally increasing. It's leveled out in the last few years, but it has a general trend of increasing. And climate change is predicted to impact conifer regeneration after harvest, making it less likely for these stands to go back to normal after they're harvested, which ultimately means just a loss of habitat for these birds. So boreal chickadees are clearly facing some obstacles throughout their range here in Minnesota. In Minnesota, habitat loss and degradation due to timber harvest seem to be one of the main drivers of their declines. So in the Avian Ecology Lab at NRI, we wanted to try to home in on what's going on with populations in Minnesota. What aspects of boreal chickadee ecology are being impacted by land use changes, and what can we expect to happen to boreal chickadees if things just keep going as they are? And what are some different ways that we can be managing forests in the state to help mitigate declines? All right, now to the research part. This is my favorite part. So some of the studies that we have done in the last 5 years are analyzing nestling diet using eDNA and metabarcoding techniques, looking at nest success and nestling growth rates, post-fledgling survival and habitat use, all in response to metrics of forest fragmentation. So kind of trying to determine if fragmentation could be impacting any of these aspects of their ecology. As part of my master's research, I studied the diet of nestling boreal chickadees using eDNA metabarcoding. So essentially looking at what bug DNA was found in their poop. So I took 105 baby bird poops and I analyzed them, and I found what different bugs were present in that. And we found 123 different species of arthropods in their feces. But we found that they're primarily being fed flies and caterpillars, also spiders and true bugs. And diet studies are useful because they can be used to determine how diets shift with climate or land use changes. And the diet studies of generalist foragers like boreal chickadees can be especially useful to see what kind of insect communities are out there and how also insect communities are changing with climate and land use changes. One well-documented consequence of fragmentation on birds is lower breeding success. So examining breeding success is pretty critical when investigating causes for population declines like this species is experiencing. And several studies have found that nest survival is lower in a fragmented landscape due to factors like higher predator abundance in those fragments and higher parasitism rates near edges. So we investigated whether fragmentation was impacting boreal chickadees nest survival at our study sites. We monitored 35 nests over 3 breeding seasons to document nest survival. And then we modeled nest survival in response to forest fragmentation metrics and habitat characteristics. And we found that in our top performing models, we found that the age of the nest and the amount of black spruce around the nesting location were important for nest survival. So for the age of the nest, as a nest gets older, it has a less likely of a chance of surviving to the next day. And that makes sense because as a nest gets older, the nestlings are getting older, they're requiring more food, parents are coming in and out of the nest, drawing more attention to predators. And then also, for boreal chickadees, we found that if there's more of their preferred habitat around where they're deciding to nest, they have a higher chance of survival. We also looked at nestling growth rates, and again, we found that growth rates were positively influenced by the percentage of black spruce on the nest site scale, so right around the nest, but then also in the greater landscape scale. And we also studied the post-fledgling period of boreal chickadees. So that's that very vulnerable time after a bird leaves a nest. Using radio transmitters and handheld telemetry, we studied their survival and habitat use. And we modeled survival in response, again, to several habitat variables. And in our best performing models, we found that fledgling age was a predictor, meaning that as a fledgling gets older, it has a better chance of survival. And that makes sense because they're better flyers, they can avoid predation. And our models also showed that black spruce around the nesting location was associated with fledgling survival. So if there was more of their preferred habitat around where they were being reared, they had a better chance of surviving that post-fledgling period. And then we also looked at what kind of habitat they were using after leaving the nest. So if you look at this figure on the right, the peachy kind of bars represent all the different habitat types that were available for them to use in the landscape. And then the teal are those that they were actually using, that we found them in. And you can again see that they are primarily using black spruce forest and pretty much avoiding other cover types. So they really are, boreal chickadees really are in Minnesota black spruce specialists. So to kind of sum up our research, boreal chickadees, in our study areas, we found that nest success, nestling growth rates, they were positively influenced by having more of their preferred habitat around their nesting location, and that fledgling movement and survival were strongly tied to black spruce, especially in areas that had high canopy cover and a high density of trees. So if it wasn't already apparent, black spruce forests are pretty crucial for this species in Minnesota. But how can we use this to inform effective conservation plans for boreal chickadees? So the conventional practice for harvest for black spruce is clear cutting. So that means just removing all of the areas all the trees in the area and then aerially reseeding, which is expensive and doesn't really accurately mimic natural regeneration. And the result of that kind of harvest and regeneration is reduced stand variability, reduced biodiversity within the forest. And clear cutting is just devastating for birds that live and breed in mature forests like the boreal chickadee. And it removes the habitat for them for decades and decades. And it also will eliminate any cavity trees for them to nest in. So when concerning bird conservation, particularly birds that depend on old growth mature forests, our obvious recommendation would be, don't harvest at all, don't remove critical habitat for birds. But we live in a real world, right, where we have real natural resources needs. So I guess the next question would be, are there alternative methods for harvesting black spruce that have less of a negative impact on the birds that use those types of forests? All right, which leads me to a new study that we are pretty excited about in the Avian Ecology Lab. So working with the Minnesota DNR, we have established an alternative harvest method experiment in the Red Lake Wildlife Management Area. So for this experiment, black spruce stands are being harvested with alternative methods such as strip cutting and group selection, with bird, mammal, and vegetation surveys, both pre and post-harvest to monitor any responses. And what we're aiming for is an outcome that maintains those areas with mature trees and high canopy cover like the boreal chickadee prefers, while also creating some variation within the forest, which might actually benefit other bird species. Specifically, these alternative methods have the potential to improve breeding habitat for another species, Minnesota species of conservation concern, which is the Connecticut warbler. And Connecticut warblers also live in these forested peatlands, but they prefer cover types of intermediate size and density. So these alternative harvests might create a more attractive habitat for breeding Connecticut warblers in the state, which is really exciting. We're just in the preliminary parts of this study. So we've had one of our stands harvested last year, and we have another one that might be harvested this winter. So just stay tuned for that, and hopefully we'll have some really interesting results in the next coming handful of years. All right, and I think I'm trying to get things back on time. We'll stop with that. Actually, really quick, I want to thank the Bird Lab and also the LCCMR. And I do have one quick little thing for my research. Also, I did some analysis on provisioning, which I filmed lots of boreal chickadee nests in their nest boxes. And I'm not going to get into the research part of that, but I do want to show everybody some clips from my provisioning videos because they are cute and you get to see some neat wildlife. All right, so this is one of our provisioning videos. Oh, one of them's coming out. I have about 30 hours of provisioning videos. This is a neat one. You'll see that this bird is banded. That is one of the nestlings from the previous year's study who came to nest in our nest boxes. And we also got some records of predator events. In our study site, squirrels were actually the top predator of nests. You can see that. This squirrel did eventually give up and leave. And then my next video is my favorite one. So this was the very last video that I analyzed. And so it was a super special treat. We have a pine marten came in to investigate. And this pine marten was here for about a half an hour. But then it did finally leave, and it never did get in. This nest did successfully fledge. And keep in mind that I had hours and hours of videos, and very few actually caught critters coming to check them out. But all right. But with that, I think we have just a couple minutes, maybe at all, for questions, but.
We'll take exactly one question. All right. I see a lone hand over here, so we're gonna give her to Bill.
Oh boy.
You showed it, and I assume that's good reason you use nest boxes. Did you have any natural cavities involved in your study?
The first year of our study was actually at the Saxon Bog, and we had boxes up, but we also did pretty extensive nest searching to find natural cavity nests, and I think we probably spent about, I don't know how many, 100 hours searching, and I found exactly one nest. They're not, like I was saying earlier, they don't do like a broadcast song, so they're really hard to find, and then to try to follow them was also very difficult. So they're pretty sneaky birds. So we kind of threw out the idea of trying to find cavity nests because it wasn't a feasible option. But they will nest in nest boxes readily.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen.